Incognito observations. Mary Collins stood quietly in the bustling terminal of Lambert International Airport, watching travelers hurry past with suitcases and carry-ons. She adjusted her hat, a modest wide-brimmed piece that framed her kind but determined face. Her salt and pepper hair peeked out in soft curls, and her outfit was understated. A simple navy cardigan, a cream scarf, and a pair of well-worn flats. She preferred traveling incognito, a habit she had maintained for decades despite her status as the CEO of Skywood Airlines. It was her way of staying connected to the reality of the company she had worked so hard to build, a reality that might look quite different when stripped of the curated VIP treatment she was used to receiving. At 72, Mary knew all too well how much appearances mattered in the world of luxury travel, but she also knew that her airline was supposed to be different. She had built Skywood Airlines from the ground up, championing a culture of fairness and respect. The luxury of first class was meant to come with impeccable service for all passengers, no matter their background or appearance. Today, she was here to find out if her legacy had truly endured. Boarding the flight, Mary approached the gate, her leather travel bag, scuffed from years of use, hanging from her arm. The gate agent, a young man in his 20s, glanced at her boarding pass without meeting her eyes and offered a flat, "Enjoy your flight." Mary smiled graciously and nodded, though she felt a pang of disappointment at the lack of warmth. She walked down the jet bridge with a steady gait, her eyes taking in the polished metal walls and the faint hum of the aircraft waiting at the end. Upon boarding, a young flight attendant stationed at the entrance barely glanced at her. "Welcome aboard," she said curtly, her tone clipped and mechanical. Mary nodded again, her polite demeanor never faltering. As she made her way to her seat in first class, she noticed how other passengers were greeted: smiles, warm welcomes, offers to assist with carry-ons. Yet, no one seemed to notice Mary. She reached her assigned seat, 1A, a premium spot she had booked without revealing her identity. The first-class cabin was everything she had envisioned during the design phase years ago. Spacious leather seats, soft ambient lighting, and a calming sense of luxury. But as she settled into her seat, Mary's critical eye caught the subtle but unmistakable disparities in treatment. A sharply dressed man 2 rows ahead was promptly offered champagne and engaged in friendly conversation by a flight attendant. A young woman draped in designer clothing was fussed over, with offers of additional blankets and snacks. When Mary requested a glass of water from her seat, the response was a curt, "I'll get to it," followed by a long wait. Her call button, pressed for a seat adjustment, went unanswered entirely. The mockery begins. Halfway through the flight, as passengers settled into the rhythm of the journey, a young flight attendant walked by carrying a tray of drinks. She paused near Mary, her gaze sweeping over her with a faint smirk. Mary could see the calculation behind the woman's eyes. Judgment, dismissal, and something else Mary had grown familiar with over the years, a sense that she didn't belong. "Are you sure you don't want a parachute?" the attendant said mockingly, holding up a cocktail napkin as if it were a strap, "in case first class isn't up to your standards." For a moment, Mary was taken aback. The comment was so brazen, so unprofessional, that it didn't register immediately. Around her, some passengers exchanged uneasy glances, while others avoided looking altogether. Mary straightened in her seat, meeting the attendant's smirk with a calm but piercing gaze. "I think I'll manage just fine. Thank you," Mary replied, her voice even and measured, though there was steel beneath it. The attendant rolled her eyes and walked away, muttering something under her breath. Mary caught fragments, words like "out of place" and "doesn't belong." She closed her eyes briefly, willing herself to remain composed. This wasn't the first time she had faced such prejudice, but the sting was no less sharp. As the flight continued, the neglect became even more glaring. Her requests for water and a blanket were ignored, while other passengers were doted on. When another attendant finally brought her a glass of water, it was placed on her tray with an air of irritation, as if fulfilling her request was an inconvenience. Moments of solidarity. Despite the rudeness, Mary noticed small gestures of kindness from those around her. An elderly man across the aisle, his face lined with age and experience, offered her a sympathetic nod after witnessing one particularly cold exchange. Another passenger, a young mother with a toddler in tow, gave Mary a faint smile of encouragement as she passed by on her way to the restroom. Mary let out a soft sigh as she leaned back in her seat. She had come on this flight expecting to observe minor lapses in service, perhaps a lack of attentiveness or professionalism, but what she had experienced went far beyond that. This wasn't just a failure of customer service. It was a failure of the culture she had worked so hard to create. She thought about the countless passengers who might have endured similar treatment, passengers without the power or resources to hold the crew accountable. She thought about the values she had instilled in her company and the trust her customers placed in her airline, and she realized that she couldn't ignore this, not just for herself, but for everyone who had been made to feel small or unwelcome. Landing and decision. When the plane landed, Mary waited patiently for the cabin to clear. The other first-class passengers disembarked quickly, the flight attendants smiling and bidding them warm farewells. But when it was Mary's turn to leave, the smiles faded, replaced by indifferent nods. Mary didn't head for the terminal. Instead, she stood near the cockpit door, waiting for the crew to gather. One by one, the flight attendants assembled, their expressions ranging from confusion to mild annoyance. They had no idea who she was or why she was waiting. Mary straightened her scarf and cleared her throat. "I'd like to have a word with the crew before I leave," she said, her voice calm but firm. The lead attendant, a woman in her mid-30s with a polished exterior, stepped forward. "Ma'am, if you have a complaint, you can submit it through our customer service department." Mary smiled faintly. "Oh, I'm not complaining. I'm here to inform you." The crew exchanged puzzled glances as Mary reached into her bag and pulled out a sleek leather folder. She opened it to reveal her Skywood Airlines CEO badge and a set of documents bearing the company's official seal. "My name is Mary Collins," she said, her voice carrying the weight of decades of leadership. "I'm the CEO of Skywood Airlines, and what I've observed on this flight is completely unacceptable." The color drained from the faces of the crew, their smugness replaced by shock and fear. Mary let the silence hang for a moment before continuing. "I've spent my life building this company on principles of fairness, respect, and professionalism," she said. "What I've seen today tells me that those principles are not being upheld. And that changes now." The unveiling begins. As Mary Collins remained seated, waiting for the last passengers to disembark, the energy inside the cabin began to shift. Flight attendants were busy with their final duties, stowing trays, straightening seatbelts, and murmuring pleasantries to the departing travelers. None of them, it seemed, gave a second thought to the composed elderly woman sitting in seat 1A. For Mary, this was an opportunity to observe their behavior further, to let the weight of their dismissive attitudes linger long enough to truly make an impact. A test of composure. The lead flight attendant, a tall woman named Brenda with sharp features and an air of detached professionalism, approached Mary briskly. Her eyes flickered with impatience, as if eager to be done with the final straggler. "Ma'am, we need to prepare the cabin for the next flight," Brenda said, her tone clipped. "If you need assistance disembarking, I can call for help." Mary glanced up, her expression calm yet unyielding. "I appreciate the offer, but I'm quite capable of leaving on my own. I'd just like to have a word with the crew before I go." Brenda raised an eyebrow, clearly annoyed. "I'm sorry, but we're on a tight schedule. If you have any concerns, you can address them through customer service." Mary allowed a faint smile to touch her lips. "Oh, I intend to address my concerns, but I believe it would be more effective to do so in person." Something in Mary's tone caught Brenda off guard. It wasn't anger or frustration. It was authority. Brenda hesitated, then gestured for the rest of the crew to gather. They approached reluctantly, their expressions a mixture of confusion and disinterest. Unmasking the problem. As the crew stood before her, Mary took a moment to survey the group. Brenda, with her curt demeanor, stood at the forefront, clearly assuming the role of spokesperson. Beside her was Ellie, the younger attendant who had made the parachute comment earlier, her smirk replaced by a look of mild unease. Two male attendants lingered in the background, avoiding eye contact and shifting awkwardly. Mary set her leather travel bag on the seat beside her and straightened her scarf. The silence in the cabin was palpable, broken only by the faint hum of the engines cooling down. "Thank you for taking the time to gather," Mary began, her voice steady and deliberate. "I'd like to discuss the service provided on this flight." Brenda crossed her arms, her impatience evident. "As I mentioned earlier, if you have complaints, our customer service team would be happy to assist." Mary's smile didn't waver. "I'm sure they would. But as the CEO of Skywood Airlines, I believe it's more appropriate to address these matters directly." The impact of her words was immediate. Brenda's arms dropped to her sides, her eyes widening in shock. Ellie's face turned pale, her mouth opening and closing as if searching for words. The two male attendants exchanged panicked glances. "You're the CEO," Brenda stammered, her voice tinged with disbelief. "I am," Mary confirmed, her gaze unwavering. "And today, I chose to fly incognito to observe the quality of service our passengers receive. What I've witnessed has been deeply disappointing. The weight of accountability." Mary stood, her presence commanding despite her modest stature. She began to walk slowly along the aisle, her words measured and purposeful. Skywood Airlines was founded on the principles of respect, equality, and professionalism, she said. "Our passengers trust us to uphold those values, whether they're flying in first class or economy. Today, I've seen those values ignored, dismissed as if they mean nothing." She paused near Ellie, whose earlier confidence had evaporated, mocking a passenger with a parachute comment, ignoring requests, offering curt, dismissive responses. Mary's voice sharpened. "This behavior is unacceptable, not just as a failure of service, but as a failure to represent the culture we've built." Ellie's head dropped, her cheeks flushed with embarrassment. Brenda stepped forward, her earlier confidence replaced by a shaky attempt at damage control. "Miss Collins, I had no idea who you were," Brenda stammered. "If I had known." Mary held up a hand, silencing her. "That's precisely the problem," she said firmly. "Good service, respect, and kindness shouldn't depend on who someone is or what you think they might be. Every passenger deserves to be treated with dignity. Passengers as witnesses." As Mary spoke, a few lingering passengers in economy class had stopped near the cockpit to listen. Among them was the elderly man who had offered Mary a sympathetic nod earlier. He now stood with arms crossed, his expression one of quiet satisfaction. Beside him, a young woman holding a toddler nodded in agreement, her eyes shining with approval. "Excuse me, Miss Collins," the elderly man said, stepping forward. "I just wanted to say I admire what you're doing. It's about time someone held people accountable for how they treat others." Mary inclined her head, gratitude in her eyes. "Thank you, sir. Your support means a great deal." The young mother chimed in. "It's not just about first class," she said. "This kind of thing happens everywhere. I've seen it so many times. People assuming they can treat others poorly because they don't think anyone will call them out." Mary turned to the crew, her gaze softening, but her resolve unshaken. "This is what I mean," she said. "Every interaction matters. Every passenger matters. And it's our responsibility to ensure that no one feels dismissed or devalued." A turning point. By now, the gravity of the situation had fully sunk in for the crew. Brenda looked down, her earlier defensiveness replaced by visible regret. Ellie's arms hung limply at her sides, her smirk long gone. The two male attendants nodded hesitantly, their expressions a mix of guilt and understanding. Mary returned to her seat and retrieved her bag, her movements deliberate. She turned to face the crew one last time. "I'll be addressing these issues formally with the airline's management team," she said. "In the meantime, I expect each of you to reflect on what's happened today. Consider the impact of your actions, not just on me, but on every passenger you encounter. You have the power to make someone's experience positive or negative. Use it wisely. With that, Mary made her way to the jet bridge, the crew watching in stunned silence as she left. Behind her, the passengers who had witnessed the confrontation began to clap, their applause echoing through the cabin. Looking ahead, as Mary stepped into the terminal, she felt a mixture of emotions: frustration, determination, and hope. The flight had revealed glaring flaws in the culture of her airline, but it had also shown her the strength of those willing to stand up for what was right. This wasn't the end of the journey. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one where Skywood Airlines would face its shortcomings head-on and emerge stronger for it. Mary was ready to lead that change, knowing that her legacy depended not just on her actions, but on the actions of every individual representing her company. Confronting the deeper issues. The applause in the cabin had faded, but Mary Collins could still hear it echoing in her mind as she walked briskly through the airport terminal. Each step felt heavier than the last. Her emotions churned, a cocktail of frustration, resolve, and a simmering determination to address the deeper rot she had just witnessed. The flight crew's behavior wasn't just a personal slight against her, it was a systemic failure. If this was how they treated her, a quiet, composed elderly woman in first class, what indignities might others have endured? A quiet conversation with the elderly man. As Mary paused near the baggage claim area, the elderly man who had offered her a kind nod earlier approached her. He held a worn leather hat in his hands, his face lined with years of wisdom and resilience. "Miss Collins," he said softly, his voice steady despite its age. "May I have a moment of your time?" Mary turned to him, her expression warm but tired. "Of course. And please, call me Mary." The man nodded, his eyes searching hers. "I just wanted to thank you," he said, "for speaking up, for doing what so many of us wish we could do. People like me. Well, we've learned to let things slide, you see. But today, you reminded me that we don't have to." Mary placed a hand on his arm, her voice filled with quiet conviction. "We all deserve respect, no matter who we are or where we come from. And if I have the power to make a difference, it's my responsibility to use it." He smiled, a flicker of hope crossing his weathered face. "You've inspired me, Mary. Don't let up." With a nod, the man walked away, leaving Mary standing alone in the bustling terminal. His words had added another layer to her resolve. She wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for people like him, people who had been overlooked, dismissed, or mocked one too many times. The executive call. Mary's next move was deliberate. She reached into her leather travel bag and pulled out her phone, dialing the private number of Skywood Airlines Vice President of Operations, Laura Grayson. Laura was one of the few people Mary trusted implicitly, a sharp, empathetic leader who shared her vision for fairness and equality within the company. "Mary," Laura answered, her voice warm but tinged with curiosity. "I wasn't expecting to hear from you today. How was the flight?" Mary didn't mince words. "Laura, we have a problem." The warmth in Laura's voice was replaced by concern. "What happened?" Mary recounted the events of the flight in meticulous detail, the dismissive attitudes, the mocking parachute comment, the blatant disparities in how passengers were treated. As she spoke, Laura remained silent, her sharp mind undoubtedly piecing together the implications. When Mary finished, Laura let out a slow breath. "This isn't just about one crew, is it?" "No," Mary replied firmly. "This is a cultural issue. I built this company to be better than this, Laura. We need to act, and fast." Laura's tone hardened with resolve. "I'll launch an internal review immediately. But Mary, this is going to ruffle some feathers." Mary's lips curled into a faint smile. "Let them ruffle. This is bigger than any one person's comfort." Revisiting the legacy. That evening, Mary returned to her modest home, a cozy two-story house filled with mementos of her decades-long journey. Framed photos lined the walls, snapshots of her standing beside Skywood Airlines' first plane, receiving awards for her contributions to the industry, and surrounded by smiling employees at company events. Each photo represented a chapter in the story of a woman who had fought tooth and nail to build something meaningful. Mary sank into her favorite armchair, her mind racing. When she had founded Skywood Airlines, it had been a bold experiment, an airline that prioritized customer care over profit margins, diversity over exclusivity. She had hired people from all walks of life, championing those who had been overlooked by other companies. Her vision had been clear: an airline that treated everyone, from passengers to employees, with respect. But over time, as the company grew and leadership shifted, cracks had begun to form. Mary had stepped back from the day-to-day operations, trusting her team to uphold the values she had instilled. Now she realized that trust had been misplaced. She reached for a journal on the side table, flipping through pages filled with notes, reflections, and goals. She found an entry from years ago, written in her careful handwriting. "Never forget why you started. Never let the values that built this company be overshadowed by ambition." Mary closed the journal, her jaw tightening. It was time to reignite the fight for those values. The meeting call. The next morning, Mary called an emergency meeting with Skywood Airlines' senior leadership team. Despite the early hour, the video conference was attended by all the key players: Laura Grayson, the VP of Operations; Peter Carrington, the CFO; Denise Morgan, the head of customer relations, and several others. Mary began the meeting without preamble. "Yesterday, I flew incognito on Flight 243, she said, her tone calm but authoritative. "What I experienced was unacceptable. It was a failure of the culture I worked so hard to build." The team listened intently as Mary detailed her observations, her words carrying the weight of both disappointment and determination. She described the crew's dismissive attitudes, the blatant disparities in service, and the mocking comment that had crossed every line of professionalism. "This isn't just about my experience," Mary continued. "It's about what this behavior represents. If I face this kind of treatment, imagine what our other passengers, those without my influence or resources, must endure." Denise Morgan, a sharp-eyed woman in her early 40s, leaned forward. "Mary, I'll admit we've seen a slight uptick in complaints recently, but I never imagined it was this pervasive." "That's the problem," Mary said firmly. "We've allowed complacency to creep in. It's time to address this head-on." A plan for action. The discussion that followed was intense but productive. The team brainstormed immediate steps to address the issue, including crew retraining. All flight attendants would undergo mandatory retraining focused on customer service, implicit bias, and professionalism. Passenger feedback. A new system would be implemented to make it easier for passengers to provide anonymous feedback, ensuring that all voices were heard. Internal audits. Teams would conduct surprise audits of flights, much like Mary had done, to observe service quality firsthand. Cultural reset. Skywood Airlines would launch a company-wide initiative to reaffirm its core values, with workshops, seminars, and open forums for employees to share their experiences and suggestions. Accountability measures. Incidents of unprofessional behavior would be met with strict consequences, ensuring that such actions were no longer overlooked. Mary listened carefully as her team contributed ideas, nodding in approval. When the meeting concluded, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just about fixing what was broken. It was about building something even stronger. Preparing for change. As Mary closed her laptop, she leaned back in her chair, her mind already racing with the next steps. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. Change never was. But Mary was no stranger to challenges. She had faced discrimination, doubt, and resistance throughout her career, and she had always emerged stronger. This time would be no different. The cultural reckoning. The emergency meeting had set the tone for what was to come. A full-scale reckoning within Skywood Airlines. Mary Collins wasn't just looking to resolve the immediate issues she'd experienced on Flight 243. She wanted to rebuild the culture of her company from the ground up. It wasn't just about service standards. It was about the soul of the organization. Mary had always believed that leadership wasn't about wielding power. It was about creating an environment where people could thrive, feel valued, and understand the weight of their actions. But what she had witnessed on her flight made her realize that the disconnect ran deeper than she thought. The company she had poured her heart into had strayed from her vision, and she was determined to bring it back. Reactions to the emergency orders. By the following week, news of Mary's flight and the resulting actions had spread throughout the airline's ranks. Employees whispered about the incognito flight that had caught everyone off guard. Some applauded Mary's boldness, while others viewed her actions with unease, worried about what her scrutiny might reveal. For many flight attendants, the new orders for retraining were met with a mix of defensiveness and apprehension. At the company's training facility, an expansive building filled with mock cabins and classroom spaces, the first group of attendants gathered for their mandatory retraining session. Among them was Brenda, the lead attendant from Flight 243, and Ellie, the younger attendant whose parachute comment had sparked much of the controversy. Brenda sat with her arms crossed, her usually confident demeanor replaced by a noticeable tension. Ellie, on the other hand, looked nervous, fidgeting with a pen and glancing around at the others. The room buzzed with murmurs as the employees exchanged stories and speculations. "Do you think she's just making an example out of us?" one attendant whispered. "I heard she's been doing this for years," another replied. "Flying undercover, watching us." The room quieted as the facilitator entered, a tall, no-nonsense woman named Joanne with decades of experience in the airline industry. Joanne had been handpicked by Mary to lead the retraining program, and she wasn't about to let anyone off easy. "Good morning," Joanne began, her voice commanding the room's attention. "You're here today because somewhere along the line, we lost sight of what Skywood Airlines stands for. This isn't just a refresher on service protocols. This is about understanding the impact of your actions on our passengers, on each other, and on the reputation of this company." Brenda shifted in her seat, her expression guarded. Ellie's gaze dropped to her lap. Mary's quiet observations. Unbeknownst to the attendees, Mary was observing the training session through a live feed in another room. She had asked Joanne to set up cameras in the facility, not to intimidate the staff, but to gain an unfiltered view of their reactions and progress. Watching the session unfold, Mary noticed the varied responses. Some attendants were engaged, taking notes and asking thoughtful questions. Others, like Brenda, appeared resistant, their body language closed off. As the session continued, Joanne introduced a role-playing exercise. Attendants were asked to act out scenarios involving difficult passengers, with the goal of demonstrating empathy and professionalism. Brenda was assigned the role of a passenger, while Ellie took on the role of the attendant. Ellie hesitated at first, clearly uncomfortable under Joanne's watchful eye. But as the exercise progressed, her demeanor softened. She began to demonstrate genuine effort, responding to the passengers' concerns with a level of care that had been absent during Mary's flight. Watching from the other room, Mary felt a glimmer of hope. Change was possible, but it would take time. And accountability. Accountability begins. While the retraining sessions continued, Mary turned her attention to the next phase of her plan, addressing systemic accountability. She convened a meeting with the airline's management team, laying out a series of initiatives designed to ensure that incidents like those on Flight 243 wouldn't happen again. One of the most significant changes was the introduction of a passenger feedback system that allowed customers to anonymously report their experiences directly to a newly established customer advocacy team. This team, led by Denise Morgan, would investigate complaints and recommend disciplinary actions or policy changes as needed. This isn't just about resolving individual complaints, Mary explained during the meeting. It's about identifying patterns and addressing root causes. If we see recurring issues with certain employees or routes, we'll know where to focus our efforts. Peter Carrington, the CFO, raised a concern. Mary, these changes are going to cost the company. The retraining alone has already stretched our budget. Mary met his gaze, her tone firm but calm. Peter, what costs more? Investing in our people and our reputation now, or losing the trust of our passengers and employees in the long run? Peter nodded, understanding her point. The room fell silent for a moment before Laura Grayson spoke up. She's right, Laura said. This is about more than money. It's about rebuilding trust. And if we do this right, it'll pay off in the long term. Facing the crew. With the new systems in place, Mary decided it was time to address the crew of Flight 243 directly. She arranged a meeting with Brenda, Ellie, and the 2 male attendants, inviting them to her office at Skywood Airlines headquarters. The crew entered the sleek, modern office with a mix of anxiety and defensiveness. Mary greeted them politely, offering them seats across from her desk. She wasted no time in addressing the situation. I want to start by saying that this isn't about pointing fingers, Mary began, her tone measured. It's about understanding what went wrong and how we can move forward. Brenda, who had been silent until now, finally spoke. Miss Collins, I want to apologize. I realize now that my attitude on that flight was unprofessional. I let my frustrations get the better of me. Ellie nodded, her voice trembling as she added, I didn't mean for my comment to be hurtful, but I see now that it was. I'm sorry. Mary listened carefully, her expression thoughtful. I appreciate your apologies, she said, but this isn't just about words. It's about actions. Are you both willing to put in the work to ensure this doesn't happen again? Both women nodded, their sincerity evident. Mary leaned back in her chair, a small smile breaking through her otherwise serious demeanor. Good, she said, because this isn't just about one flight. It's about the culture we're building together. And it starts with each of you. Rebuilding the legacy. As the weeks turned into months, the effects of Mary's efforts began to ripple through Skywood Airlines. The retraining sessions continued, with employees reporting a renewed sense of purpose and pride in their work. The passenger feedback system uncovered areas for improvement, leading to tangible changes in service protocols. And most importantly, the culture of the company began to shift, moving closer to the vision Mary had originally dreamed of. For Mary, the journey was far from over. But as she watched her airline take its first steps toward redemption, she felt a deep sense of satisfaction. Skywood Airlines was more than a business. It was a reflection of her values, her resilience, and her unwavering belief in the power of change. Bridging the divide. Mary Collins sat in her office, the sunlight streaming through the large floor-to-ceiling windows. The view of the bustling airport below served as a constant reminder of the company she had built and the passengers who depended on its services daily. Her meeting with the crew of Flight 243 had been an essential step. But the real work of healing and rebuilding was just beginning. This wasn't just about fixing isolated incidents. It was about addressing the underlying culture and restoring trust across all levels of Skywood Airlines. As Mary reviewed the latest reports from the newly formed customer advocacy team, she noticed a troubling pattern. The majority of complaints were not about service delays or technical issues. They were about attitude, treatment, and respect, or the lack thereof. These weren't just one-off incidents. They revealed a deeper divide within the organization. Mary knew it was time to go beyond retraining. She needed to foster open dialogue, bring together employees from all backgrounds, and create opportunities for empathy and understanding. And to do that, she would need to take an unconventional approach. The listening tour. Mary decided to launch what she called the listening tour, a series of town hall meetings at Skywood Airlines hubs across the country. These sessions would bring together employees from different departments, flight crews, ground staff, customer service representatives, and corporate executives, to share their experiences, voice their concerns, and collaborate on solutions. The first town hall was held at Skywood's headquarters. The large conference room was packed with employees from every corner of the company, from junior flight attendants to senior managers. Mary stood at the front of the room, her presence commanding but approachable. "Thank you all for being here," she began, her voice steady but warm. "I know the past few weeks have been challenging, and I want to acknowledge the hard work and dedication each of you brings to this company. Today is not about blame. It's about understanding. It's about hearing each other and finding a way forward together." Mary invited employees to speak freely, ensuring them that the session was a safe space. At first, the room was quiet, the tension palpable. But gradually, voices began to emerge. Voices from the field. A flight attendant named Monica was the first to speak. She was young, with an earnest demeanor that belied her nerves. "I've only been with Skywood for 2 years," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "But in that time, I've seen how easy it is to fall into bad habits. Sometimes we're so focused on the tasks at hand that we forget we're dealing with people with real feelings." A ground crew member named Hector chimed in. "It's not just the flight crews," he said. "On the tarmac, we're often overlooked. Passengers see us as part of the background, but we're the ones making sure their flights are safe. It's hard not to feel invisible." Mary nodded, taking notes as she listened. The stories were raw and unfiltered, revealing both the challenges employees faced and the ways in which the company's culture had failed them. Then Brenda, the lead flight attendant from Flight 243, stood up. Her posture was tense, but her voice was steady. "I want to apologize," she said, addressing the room. "I was part of the crew that failed Ms. Collins on that flight. I let my own frustrations get in the way of doing my job. But this experience has been a wake-up call for me. I'm committed to doing better." The room was silent for a moment, and then a smattering of applause broke out. Brenda's vulnerability had struck a chord. Building bridges. As the listening tour continued to other hubs, Mary began to notice a shift. Employees who had once felt isolated or overlooked were finding common ground. Pilots shared stories of high-pressure decisions with ground staff. Flight attendants discussed the emotional toll of dealing with difficult passengers, and corporate executives listened to the daily challenges of frontline workers. One of the most powerful moments came during a session in Atlanta, where Ellie, the younger flight attendant from Flight 243, spoke up for the first time. "I made a mistake," she admitted, her cheeks flushed with embarrassment. "I let stereotypes cloud my judgment, and I hurt someone who deserved better. But I've learned that one moment doesn't define who we are. It's what we do next that matters." Her words were met with murmurs of agreement and nods from the audience. Mary felt a swell of pride as she watched Ellie take responsibility and grow. The ripple effect. The listening tour wasn't just changing the culture within Skywood Airlines. It was also inspiring change among the passengers. Word of Mary's efforts had spread, thanks to media coverage and social media posts from employees and passengers alike. Skywood's reputation, once tarnished, was beginning to recover. Passengers shared stories of improved service, kind gestures from flight attendants, and a renewed sense of professionalism across the board. One such story came from a passenger named Rachel, who had flown on a Skywood flight after reading about the company's reforms. In an email to the customer advocacy team, she wrote, "I was nervous about flying, given everything I'd heard. But the crew on my flight went above and beyond to make me feel welcome. It's clear that Skywood is taking this seriously, and I just want to say thank you." Mary read the email late one evening, a smile spreading across her face. It was a small victory, but it was meaningful. These moments, she realized, were the building blocks of trust. The challenge of sustaining change. Despite the progress, Mary knew the work was far from over. Change was fragile, and without constant reinforcement, it could easily unravel. She began working with her leadership team to implement long-term strategies to sustain the momentum. One initiative was the creation of the Skywood Values Council, a group of employees from all levels of the company tasked with monitoring and upholding the airline's core values. The council would meet quarterly to review feedback, propose new policies, and ensure that the company stayed true to its mission. Another initiative was the launch of a mentorship program, pairing experienced employees with newer hires to foster a sense of community and shared purpose. Brenda and Ellie both volunteered to be mentors, eager to share the lessons they had learned. A personal reflection. As the months went by, Mary took time to reflect on her journey. She thought about the countless challenges she had faced as a woman of color in a male-dominated industry, the sacrifices she had made to build Skywood Airlines, and the moments of doubt that had tested her resolve. But she also thought about the resilience of her employees, the courage of those who had spoken up during the listening tour, and the progress they had made together. Skywood Airlines was not perfect. No company ever was. But it was on the path to becoming something better, something stronger. One evening, as Mary prepared to leave the office, she received a message from Laura Grayson. It was a simple note, but it carried profound meaning. "Mary, I just wanted to say thank you for reminding us why we're here. You've shown us that leadership isn't about perfection. It's about purpose, and we're proud to follow your example." Mary smiled, her heart full. The work wasn't done, but for the first time in a long time, she felt hopeful about the future. A new horizon. Months had passed since Mary Collins had quietly boarded Flight 243, unaware that it would be the catalyst for the most profound reckoning in her company's history. Skywood Airlines was no longer the same company it had been. The cultural shift Mary had fought for was beginning to take root, but she knew that lasting change required constant vigilance. It wasn't just about improving policies or training staff. It was about creating a company where every employee felt proud to work and every passenger felt respected. Mary's office, lined with years of accolades and memories, now housed a new addition. A large vision board mounted on the wall. On it were photos and quotes from employees and passengers who had been positively impacted by the airline's transformation. It served as a reminder of why the work mattered and how far they had come. Final implementation of reforms. With the listening tour completed, Mary and her leadership team began implementing the final phase of their reforms. One of the key initiatives was the Skywood Pledge, a set of guiding principles that every employee, from ground crew to senior executives, would be required to sign and uphold. It wasn't just a piece of paper, it was a commitment to treating every passenger and colleague with dignity, fairness, and professionalism. At the official launch event for the Skywood Pledge, hundreds of employees gathered in the company's largest hangar, which had been transformed into an inspiring venue. The atmosphere was electric with anticipation, a stark contrast to the unease and tension that had clouded the company months earlier. Employees wore pins with the words, "We are Skywood," etched on them, a symbol of their shared purpose. Mary stood at the podium, her salt and pepper hair framing her face as she looked out at the crowd. "Today is a turning point," she began, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "We are not just signing a pledge. We are committing to a standard of excellence, a culture of respect, and a future where every passenger feels valued. And it starts with each of us." The crowd erupted into applause as employees lined up to sign a massive version of the pledge displayed on stage. Brenda and Ellie were among the first to sign, their expressions a mixture of pride and determination. Mary watched as they wrote their names, knowing how far they had come since that fateful flight. Passenger redemption. The changes at Skywood Airlines didn't go unnoticed. Passengers began sharing their positive experiences online, turning what had once been a stream of complaints into a chorus of praise. One viral post came from a frequent flyer named Danielle, who had been on a recent flight and witnessed a young flight attendant going above and beyond for an elderly passenger. "I'd flown with dozens of airlines, and I'd never seen this level of care," Danielle wrote. "Skywood Airlines is proving that they're not just about getting us from point A to point B. They are about making us feel human." The post garnered thousands of likes and shares, sparking a wave of goodwill for the airline. Mary couldn't help but smile when she read it, though she knew that one viral moment didn't signify the end of their work. It was a step in the right direction, a sign that they were on the right path. Recognizing the crew, Mary hadn't forgotten the crew of Flight 243, the team that had unwittingly sparked this transformation. She invited them to a private meeting in her office, wanting to personally acknowledge the role they had played in Skywood's evolution. Brenda, Ellie, and the two male attendants entered the office with a mixture of nerves and curiosity. Mary greeted them warmly, offering them seats around the large wooden table at the center of the room. "I asked you here today to thank you," Mary began, her tone sincere. "What happened on that flight wasn't easy for any of us, but it served as a wake-up call. Because of your willingness to take responsibility and grow, we've been able to create meaningful change." Brenda spoke up, her voice steady but emotional. "Ms. Collins, I never imagined that one flight could have such an impact. I've learned so much these past months, and I'm proud to be part of this company again." Ellie nodded, her cheeks flushed. "I still think about that day. It taught me that every moment matters. Every interaction has the power to lift someone up or tear them down. I'm grateful for the second chance." Mary smiled, her eyes shining with pride. "You've earned it, and I hope you'll continue to set an example for your colleagues." Before they left, Mary presented each of them with a small plaque that read, "For transforming challenges into opportunities. Thank you for helping Skywood soar higher, expanding the vision." With the reforms firmly in place, Mary began looking toward the future. Skywood Airlines was no longer content with being just another airline. Mary wanted it to set a global standard for excellence and equity in the travel industry. She partnered with organizations that specialized in diversity and inclusion training, ensuring that Skywood would continue to evolve. Mary also launched a scholarship program for aspiring aviation professionals from underrepresented backgrounds. The Skywood Future Aviators Fund would provide financial support and mentorship to students pursuing careers as pilots, engineers, and airline executives. Mary knew that true change required representation at all levels, and she was determined to build a pipeline of talent that reflected the diversity of the world they served. A defining moment. 6 months after the reforms began, Mary attended the first Skywood Values Council meeting. Employees from across the company gathered to share updates, celebrate successes, and discuss ongoing challenges. One employee, a young ground crew member named Alex, stood up to share his story. "I used to feel invisible in this company," Alex said, his voice trembling slightly. "But since these changes started, I felt seen for the first time. I know my work matters, and that makes me want to do even better." Mary felt a lump rise in her throat as the room erupted into applause. This was why she had fought so hard, for people like Alex, for passengers like Danielle, for employees like Brenda and Ellie. Skywood Airlines wasn't just a company, it was a community. Looking to the horizon, as Mary left the meeting, she stepped outside to watch a Skywood plane take off. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the tarmac. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, the challenges, the triumphs, the moments of doubt, and the unwavering belief that change was possible. Skywood Airlines still had a long way to go, but Mary knew they were on the right path. They had faced their flaws, embraced accountability, and emerged stronger. As the plane disappeared into the horizon, Mary felt a sense of peace. This was her legacy, a company that soared not just because of its planes, but because of its people.